Turn.
Welcome to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to college prospect evaluation with a fantasy football focus. With your hosts, John Arrington, Aaron Wilcox, and Andy Starr. This podcast brings you actionable strategies and player-driven analysis for your Devy, C2C, and Dynasty leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into some strategy talk. Welcome to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, John Arrington, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox and Andy Starr. And we finally got the new intro in, sounding good. Got Andy in there professionally instead of just me throwing my weight in there. And we are back. We are in your ears. We've been getting a lot of good feedback, a lot of good listens, so we do appreciate that from you guys. I think switching to weekly was a good choice. Let's just put it that way. So we appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate any feedback and obviously any kind of reviews or anything like that you give us. But first, we got to check in with the boys, and then we will dive into Guess the Guy, our new game that we will be playing. Aaron, how are you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing well. That intro for the podcast was just awesome. Glad to have that just slightly updated, but same old podcast, same great content for everybody. And yes, excited to be back with you guys.
Absolutely. Andy, how are you doing? Are you back? Are you 100% off of jet lag?
I think so. I still stay up too late, but that's just my norm at this point. But yes, I would concur with your guys' statements about the intro. If for those who didn't see it, for those audio-only listeners, the MVP Diego Pavia does have some highlights in the intro video, which I appreciate, John, for putting that in. Just for me, I assume, because I think it went against every core value he's had to put Diego Pavia in a Devy intro. But thank you, John.
You're welcome. I mean, honestly, I'll probably update it annually. The first one had some of mine and Aaron's favorite players. One Bucky Irving, Andy's favorite players too. But we had one Bucky Irving. I'm trying to remember who else was in it now. It's literally been a week since I've seen it, and yet I can't remember who else was in it.
It's like Drake May and Caleb Williams, maybe. Unless
Yes.
that was yeah.
No, yep. Drake May, Caleb Williams. We had Bucky Irving and a couple other people in it. So I wanted to incorporate some players that we each individually enjoy and love, and maybe we're a little stronger. We have stronger feelings than anyone else, or at least the others. And so of course I had to throw in Diego Pavia for Andy. I had to throw in Jeremiah Love for Aaron. Just burning guys down the sideline there. And then, of course, Jordan Tyson had to be in there. And I don't know if you noticed, but when Steven, the voiceover guy for the actual intro, when Steven says, "Let's dive in," Jordan Tyson is diving into the end zone. So it kind of works out perfectly. Obviously, you have to go to our YouTube page on Gridiron Ratings on YouTube and check it out. Make sure you like and subscribe and do all that kind of stuff. But you'll see there's a few little nuanced things to pick up on, every time you watch it and all that kind of stuff. But enough about the intro. It is time to play Guess the Guy. Like I told you before, Aaron and I played a game while Andy was away, and I said we're going to be playing more games, having a little more fun, putting ourselves to the test. And so we're going to continue that on. We actually have a point system now in place. We have everything we need in place. We've figured out our system, our template for questions and all that kind of stuff. So moving forward, barring your occasional like mock draft or something like that where we maybe go off script a little bit, for the most part we're probably going to be playing a game here called Guess the Guy to start the pod off. this time, because I asked Aaron, this time Aaron's going to be asking Andy, and we're actually going to be starting the points. And then at the end of the off season, we will probably see who has accumulated the most points, who has won Guess the Guy for the off season, and then we'll probably do it either next off season or possibly in the season. We'll figure all that kind of stuff out. But have a little fun before we actually dive into the strategy talk. Aaron, or I guess I should ask Andy. Andy, are you nervous? Are you ready?
I am nervous. Like I was talking off the air, I was like, I'm not going to be good at this game, but we'll see how it goes. Maybe I get lucky. Maybe I'll pull something out of thin air here. So I'm excited though.
All right, and Hollywood's in the chat. What's up, buddy? Appreciate you listening. So basically, the way that it's going to work is we're going to have up to 6 clues, and you get as many points. It's like the inverse for the point system. So basically, if you get it on the first clue, you get 6 points. Get on the second clue, 5 points, so on and so forth. So we'll keep tabs of that throughout the off season. Like I said, here we go, Aaron. Clue number 1 for Andy. Start us off. Guess the
Right.
guy.
Yes, Andy. And the nice thing about this game too is we're not doing like FCS transfers. We're not doing freshmen, so it makes it a little bit more doable for us. But first hint, this player plays the wide receiver position, Andy.
All right, wide receiver position. I think you're going to go a little bit in the bag. So, oh man, I don't even know if I have a guess. See, like I'm already on the spot, and I can't even think of anything.
Jeremiah Smith.
I'll say Krishan McCray, wide receiver from Michigan State.
Ooh, fair sleeper guess. Nope, that was not the guy. Do you like your next
Okay.
hint here?
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. This guy last year carved out a receiving yards market share of 16%.
Okay, so not too shabby. 16% sounds like he was probably a sophomore last year, if I had to guess, or second or third year. Oh, that doesn't help me though. I'm trying to think of just anybody. Isaiah Hunter, Oklahoma.
Er,
That was not it.
Oh, darn it. All right. I thought that was a decent guess, though.
You know, one thing we didn't talk about here is, is the person that's not involved in the game allowed to help in any way, shape, or form, or do I just keep my mouth shut? Because I'm sitting here wanting to like say, not like give anything away. I don't know who it is, so but I'm sitting here like wanting to help out.
I mean, you
Right,
could give your thoughts and stuff, but I don't think you can help. Like you could throw some color commentary.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right. I'll give you your next one. This guy is going into his 4th year in college,
Okay.
so he'll be a 4th-year player.
I was gonna say it when you said, "Oh, he's probably a sophomore," I said, "Or a really crappy senior."
4th year. It couldn't be Chase Roberts from BYU, could it?
That's a great guess, just because we had recently discussed him in our little chat.
Right.
But no, that is not the guy.
Oh my God. I feel like my guesses are good, but they're not. It could be anybody.
Yeah, no, your guesses are all good. The conference this player plays in is the SEC.
Okay. So now we're narrowing it down a little bit. I got to think of SEC. And let's.
I'm already thinking Andy's doing better. Like just coming up with the names that he's come up with, is probably 10 times better than I'll ever do in this game. There's a reason why I was like, yeah, I'll start. I'll do Aaron on the week 1, and then Aaron can do Andy in week 2.
I want to say because Texas A&M had a couple transfers. I know one was Mario Craver, and then the other one is slipping my mind right now, but I feel like he's a 4th-year guy. What was his name? I can't look it up because that's cheating, right?
Yeah.
I think I know who you're talking about, though. I mean,
Yeah.
so you're thinking of the guy who just transferred in from NC State?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Concepcion.
Okay. So it wouldn't be him because he's a 3rd year. Um, I don't even know if I can give a solid guess here. Um,
Oh, we have listeners giving guesses. Felix Sharp,
is
bestie.
that allowed? You can't give guesses. That this is gonna throw the whole point system off.
I guess so. We got Felix trying to help out.
All right,
Um,
I'm blocking the chat so I can't see it. So don't put anything on the screen,
yeah, I'm not
Josh.
going
Okay,
to give it
okay.
away. I'm not going to say yes or no
Um,
until you.
um, I'm gonna have to pass because I can't think of anybody that fits the criteria right now. I'm gonna need more information.
Yeah, you think
And I don't
SEC
want any more
is
dead
is
air.
a great hint, and it's not a terrible hint. I mean, obviously, that's when Aaron got it last time, but it still
Yeah.
doesn't narrow it down that much.
All right. Well, next hint then, unless you got anybody that came to mind, you're good. I'll
You
give
just
you the
go ahead
next
and give
one.
me the next one.
Yes. This player plays in 2025. Will play for LSU.
Okay.
Oh,
So that would be um, not Dane Key, Barry and Brown.
Final guess.
That's my final guess.
You got it. Very nice work, Andy.
nice.
Let's
And
go.
and that's actually not an easy one because there's Aaron Anderson there, and former transfer, and then you have Nick Anderson coming over from Oklahoma, so a guy transferring into LSU. And then you got Barry and Brown.
That's
Um,
true. There was a few guys I could have
Yeah,
went with.
and aren't they all seniors?
I felt like Barry
yeah.
and Brown was a lock, but now you just listed those guys off. I was like, oh, never mind.
Hey, go with your gut. That was great. Guest of the show, friend of the show, Felix Sharp had also really good guest there. Jeremy
Was that
Bernard.
Jeremy
but that
Bernard?
that was, yep. But that was not
Yep.
it.
Ah,
Andy got it. So very good work.
all right. What does that get me? 2 points. I'll take anything, honestly. So
Yes, that gives you 2 points. I will give you your 2 points now, and you are on the leaderboard apparently.
all right.
So we will see. We'll continue playing Guess the Guy on future episodes, and hopefully I can do somewhat close to that because I'm scared. I'm very nervous.
It's
Um,
hard once you're on the spot.
oh
It
yeah,
is.
I can only imagine, especially when I feel like with the receivers, it's kind of tough, but we really focus on a lot of these receivers, especially when we like dive deep and stuff. I'm really worried. We start talking about some of these deeper running backs, like some of them, some of these players, like I've literally never even heard of. When I go through Devy Beth, and I'm like, man, I have to literally go to like 247 right now and figure out who the hell this player is.
Yeah.
All right, well, that is enough of that. That was a lot of fun, and hopefully Andy had some fun. I know Aaron did. But we are here tonight to talk to you about Dynasty and Devy and C2C strategy talk. Basically, I saw a post on Twitter, and it was like, why doesn't anybody ever talk about Devy strategy or C2C strategy? All they ever talk about players. I'm like, man, I feel like at least for the longest time, it was almost the complete opposite. It was always like Devy strategy and C2C strategy talk and everything, and no one ever really talked about the players, or maybe it was like more like team based. It was always like, oh well, you got to get your Alabama players, you got to get your Texas players, and that was it. Like it didn't go much deeper than that. Now, maybe we're starting to get into a world where we're starting to get a lot more Devy analysts, C2C analysts, and we're starting to actually get some like actual player takes out there. But I don't know. Maybe it's just like a changing world, but I didn't realize that people were craving the strategy talk. And so obviously a couple times a year we have to get back and just say, "Hey, we're not going to talk about players per se except for obviously Barry and Brown. We're not going to we're just going to talk about, how do we go into a startup? How do we go into a draft? How do we go into a supplemental draft? What do we do when we're doing our Devy supplementals? Is there a difference if it's a short Devy roster or a deep Devy roster, like all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about basically any kind of strategy talk that we can possibly think about tonight. And with that, I will let Aaron and Andy start because I'll tell you what, they're two of the best Devy and C2C players that I've ever played with. They have each won C2C and Devy championships in the past year, within the past year, and in leagues that I've been in with them. So I'm going to let them start it out because I'll tell you what, these boys know how to play Devy and C2C.
All right, I'll go. So if we're just talking like startup, I think that's the best place to start if you're talking strategy, because the first thing you're going to do is the startup. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can attack a startup draft. The league that I was in last year with John and Aaron, actually, the Devy University League, I took an approach that I had never done before, which was one where I traded a lot of my college startup picks to improve my NFL roster almost immediately. And by doing that, I was kind of sacrificing the Devy value on my college side in favor of CFF value. And the reason I did that is because I felt like especially with the league that has waivers, I felt like I could field a competitive college team with later round picks, just based on how I know who scores points, or I can make a good determination on who's going to score a lot of points, and get those guys in the 10th plus round. That's not something I typically do. Like I said, that was the first time I tried it, and it actually worked out really well for me last year. But it's
How well
not
did it
like,
work out?
I mean, I just won both sides, so not me and Aaron split, but I did win the championship on the NFL as well. But he had I think Aaron was right there too, where he could have easily won both sides as well. So
Yeah,
there's
you guys were both in the
definitely
mix for sure.
yeah, there's definitely multiple ways you can attack a startup. That's one way. I I tend to want to get the best out of my NFL side in the beginning because that team is going to be there longer, obviously. You can turn over a college roster in 1 or 2 years pretty easily, just given supplemental picks and waivers and all that sort of thing. But an NFL roster is a lot harder to build up. So in the startup, I want to try and focus on getting a really young and competitive team that I can rely on for 5, 6 years, because I know that in that time I should be able to really build up the college side, even if I do kind of punt it on the first year. So that's kind of what I was thinking with that strategy last year, but I took it to a very, very extreme where like I gave away like 9 out of my first 10 picks in the college side, which is not something I typically would do. But that's just where I'm at with the startup. And just in general, I think the takeaway that I would say is, focus on making sure your NFL team is solid. You don't want to sacrifice your NFL team to support your college team, because that's a strategy that could potentially work for 1 or 2 seasons, and then everything's just going to kind of fall apart, and you're going to be just hoping that your college guys are hitting later on. So focus on the NFL, because that's what you're going to be stuck with for the longest time.
Yeah, I guess the real question is, you said you kind of went to the extreme, and obviously it worked out. So, we can't say, oh, what are you going to do now? I don't know that you're necessarily like set up for the future in any on either side, really. You're going to have to make some solid picks and do some things. Not that I'm doubting you, but I guess the real question is, would you do it again, or would you recommend for somebody to do it?
It's scary because you're not getting any of those high end future assets, and everybody else has at least 1 or 2, 3 or 4 guys that they can rely on to come onto their NFL team in the next 2 or 3 years. Whereas if you do what I did, you're kind of rolling the dice and hoping that you can hit on a waiver pick or a waiver pickup or something, uh, because you're not going to get a high supplemental pick doing that, and you're just sort of hoping that you hit something, and it's a lot of hope. And if you're good, it's a little bit more hope, but it's still, at the end of the day, the percentages are low. So I don't know if I'd recommend doing it, but I would recommend trading at least some of your higher end college picks to try and improve your NFL side. But I don't know if I would go ahead and say just trade all your first 10 picks to move them onto NFL talent, because that does get a little scary.
No, I definitely agree with that. Now, I would consider myself a pretty conservative drafter. I don't consider Aaron a conservative drafter, but I don't think he goes to the extremes that Andy does. So, Aaron, what are you looking to do in a C2C startup draft? How are you looking to attack it, or do you just kind of go in with an open mind?
Yeah, well, I'll speak a little bit of my tendencies as drafter, and not saying that everybody needs to play this way. Not everybody wants to play the way that I play because I have somewhat of a chaotic draft strategy, or at least trading strategy in general, because I'm always trying to move up and down the board. But we talk about this if you're looking at dynasty or redraft startups, and you're looking at tier-based drafting most of the case, right? I mean, draft within a tier, maybe move down within that tier, and gain some value in future picks, whatever the case is. I try to do that as well in my C2C league drafts. It can be startups, it can be supplementals. If there's maybe four guys that I want here, and I have the ability to maybe have a conversation with the guys behind me. Hey, do you want to move up a spot or two here? Gain some value in the next round or a little bit later, or drafting an extra pick later in the draft or next year. Or maybe, like Andy said, trading some valuable assets there on the college side to land some NFL talent. I think that's a valid and valuable strategy to try at least. It doesn't always work out, right? Not everybody wants to sell off on the NFL side. I think more and more people realize you kind of want to keep that NFL side, all the studs there, the bulk of the talent there. Keep building, yes, through the college draft, but don't completely deplete that NFL side because it's just so hard to rebuild it and eventually become a contender on the NFL side. I have never really seen somebody fully put together a rebuild when they've scrapped the NFL side, let's say like in a C2C league, where they just have no viable NFL starters and just build on the college side. Like, it's just too many variables, too many guys, have injuries, off the field things come up. They just don't develop like you thought they would. It's just a risky way to go punting on the NFL side. So ultimately, I think John is the closest I have seen in trying to put together, that Studley College side and truly boost the NFL, get the NFL to become a contender organically through that campus or college squad. And it's not even John's fault. He took over a team that was pretty good already on the college side, and he's just really built it by drafting, and he's leaned into that, taking over that orphan team from one of my buddies, Drew, actually. So John's done an awesome job, but I've until John truly pulls it off and wins a championship or makes some title runs at least on the NFL side, I cannot recommend really just punting that NFL side. So that's echoing some of the things that Andy already said. And I will say that, if you don't do tier-based drafting, at least try to scoop up value however you can in these drafts. So if somebody is trying to desperately draft or trade up for a guy, and you're like, you know what, I don't really have one guy I need here. I'm not in love with only one asset. I'll move back. I just think it's a smart way to just keep rebuilding, give yourself more and more high-end opportunities, whether it's later in the draft or, again, future picks or otherwise.
Yeah, like I said before, I tend to be more conservative. I don't know if Felix is still in the chat, but he helped me when I could not, my brain was not working properly, but he helped me coin the phrase Devy heavy. And that is definitely the way that I attack any kind of supplemental or even startup drafts. I want to focus on players that are going to make it to the NFL or players that I think will make it to the NFL, having a solid shot at getting there. And actually, I just brought up our startup from the Devy University, and I'm a man of my word. Like, I'm looking at it now. A lot of people were switching over, going CFF heavy. Once you got to round 10, round 12, round 15, so on and so forth. I'm looking at it. I I took Eric McAllister in round 15. I took Bajal Tootin in round 17, Caden Durham in round 18, Jalen Hale in round 19, Sam Levitt in round 21, and I mean Jordan Tyson round 26. I mean, I'm not saying that I never was thinking CFF at any point at those, but I mean you're not really necessarily screaming CFF with any of those picks. Maybe Bajal Tootin, but I always believed that he was a little more than just a CFF guy, and so there was definitely some Devy. Uh, there was definitely some Debbie, in the back of my mind when it was going on. Felix says, "I'm not listening to you, John." Well, as long as you're listening to Andy and Aaron, you'll still learn something tonight, Felix. Hopefully, that'll help you in the league of record because I know it's been kind of rough there for you, buddy. But I, I I really do just I want to try to focus on players that will help my NFL squad as much as possible, even if it means that I don't necessarily compete as well on the college side. But what I've found is I still typically do compete. I might not be the best team on the college side or anything like that, but I do compete. I still have fun on the college side. I get into the mix with with the playoffs and possibly can even go on a run sometimes depending on who hits and all that kind of stuff. But then when we transition over to the NFL side, and a lot of guys are like, all right, well, this fifth year player's done. He's not playing football anymore. And this ninth year player's doing this now. He's selling, cars and whatever car lot. And I'm sitting there adding Basil Tootin and Jordan Tyson and Sam Levitt, and that's when I'm like, all right, now this is how I win. And so I'm not saying it always works, but I feel like there's probably like the ideal scenario is probably something in between, but just the way that I love doing it is just going with that Devy heavy approach and just really trying to focus on players that I think have it and have what it takes to actually make it to the NFL.
No, I
I
like
was
that, and we have talked about that in the past a little bit too. How those Devi shots they can actually show up for the scoring side of your campus to Cadden leagues. So that's always a huge plus when they actually come through. I will say there are those scenarios too where a guy is seen as like a CFF only type of asset. So I will say, for example, last year in this draft, just give one example, RJ Harvey was kind of that way. RJ Harvey was like, yeah, this guy's like really old for the running back position. He's got some juice, but he's just a CFF guy, right? And then I think that provided a little bit of value for me to scoop him up in the late ninth round there. So, a guy not only helps you with a lot of scoring, but just a sliver of hope for that Devy side. And so if you can draft guys, it's just saying like anywhere in the middle to late rounds where you're like, you know what, they give me a nice CFF ceiling and or floor. They can help me from a production standpoint, from a competing standpoint, but also a sliver of NFL upside. That's great. Like look at these group of five teams, the Mountain West teams, and otherwise, um, Sun Belt, etc. It's just not great for NFL future. It's just the hit rates are so low. It's just needle in a haystack kind of thing. So if you can at least get a guy who's a valid producer who could potentially break out like a Caleb Johnson this last year at Iowa, late in a draft, or even pick him up off of waivers, a guy who plays in the Power 4 level and has maybe a little bit of intrigue with the profile, that guy breaks out, that's a big time NFL asset. So if you only try to stick to these like small schools, these CFF only producing guys as the majority of your roster, you're going to miss out on a lot of guys who end up being valuable NFL contributors or maybe go higher than people thought in the NFL draft.
And he knows something about picking up Caleb Johnson off of waivers, don't you, there, buddy?
Yeah, I sure do. And I'll just add to that as well. Just to not necessarily play devil's advocate, but also throw in another perspective just in the, in the nature of college football today in the transfer portal. These, CFF only guys are having these big years at the G5 level. And now we're seeing them move on to the P4 level. And a lot of the times it's not going to work, but some of the times it might work. So if you did draft a guy like Mackay Hughes last year, and you guys all know my feelings on Mackay Hughes, so I'm not like endorsing him, but he's a guy that went from a CFF only person to now who's perceived as a higher level Devy running back because he's now transferred to Oregon. And there's other uh, players like that, like Ahmad Hardy, who's playing for Missouri now, and Ishmael Mahdi, who transferred from Texas State to Arizona. So these guys that were CFF only, Fluff Bothwell is now at Mississippi State. They're moving on to the Power Four, and they're going to get that opportunity. So yes, you shouldn't fill your roster with G5 guys because that's not the norm that these guys are moving on. But there is that opportunity now that these players have, where if they have these just unreal seasons at the G5 level, they're going to get opportunities in the transfer portal to play at a higher level, and maybe they are building their Devy value that way.
No, like I said, I think the ideal scenario is somewhere in between what I do and what you do. It's like you want to get some kind of mix and everything. But you know what? I think we've both shown that it can work, and it's just a matter of actually making it work and whatever you feel comfortable with. Like I said, I'm okay being like the fourth best or fifth best guy on the college side. I'm perfectly fine with that. I still enjoy the college side. I still have that opportunity to be there. But I know I'm never gonna beat that CFF team that just went all in and I'm fine with that. But like once again, once we start transitioning over to the NFL side, that's where I'm like, all right, well, that's why I'm like, I'm okay not winning on the college side as much, or at least not having that chance as much. But
And you might win. I mean, it's never a
sure.
guarantee. Like you said, you're kind of in the dance, right? You're um, at least in the playoffs potentially with that approach. And if you execute that right, and the guy just has an off week that you're going against, now you're in the semifinals, finals, and anything can happen, especially if you have some good waiver wire pickups. If your league allows some waiver wires. So, yeah, I don't mind either of those approaches. I mean, I think Andy has got to give himself some credit too. There's some guys there. I think Cam Scadaboo too in the 19th round that Andy had. It was like that's a sliver of kind of what I was saying earlier with the RJ Harvey thing. Sliver of hope that he's like an NFL guy. Like maybe he's never a Saquon Barkley type, but like he could be a valuable player for sure on the campus side, maybe a little bit on the NFL. So just hit on some of those guys, and you might have some success there on both sides.
Yeah, but he also took Diego Pavia in the 18th round, and we know he's never going to make the NFL. So it's you swing and you miss, sometimes, but every once in a while you get that grand slam, and it all works out for you.
He carried my team, man. I needed those QB 1 weeks from him, and he delivered. So I'm not
Him
mad about
transferring
that
to
at all.
Vanderbilt was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to you.
I mean, that was the whole reason I was all up on him because of the transfer. I was like, oh, this guy's going to play in the SEC.
Yeah.
Let's see it.
All right. Well, so obviously, not all of our listeners are diehard C2C 50-man rosters and all that kind of stuff. Some of them are just straight Devy rosters, Devy leagues. I don't think we need to talk too much about a startup because, I mean, for the most part, with your Devies, unless you're talking about like a really deep Devy, which at that point you could probably just utilize some of our C2C strategies. But why don't we dive into some supplemental talk, and we'll get into the C2C supplemental talk here in a minute. But why don't we start with a short Devy bench, 5-man roster, 5-man Devy. You're just, you're basically playing Dynasty, but you're getting your rookie picks a year early, essentially, is the way that I'm looking at it. Is there any way? Obviously, you're going into it with a completely different strategy than what you're doing with C2C or anything like that. So, Aaron, why don't you start us off here? What are you looking for in like a shallow Devy league? How are you utilizing those picks, and what are you focusing on if you have an early first round pick, if you have a later first round pick, so on and so forth?
Yeah. So in general, I'm not really drafting for need. We'll establish that. I don't think any of us strongly advocate for that. When you're on the Devy side and you see a really, really good player, even if you need a quarterback, like don't pass on a Jeremiah Smith or, some sort of stud, right? Draft those really good players. Despite if your NFL side really needs a quarterback, you can always trade for one later in time. One should become available. So best player available, any position. Besides tight end, right? We don't heavily draft a lot of tight ends here in Devy. There are those exceptions, the Brock Bowers of the world, but those are quite rare. And then we see some guys flame out, like even the Kyle Pitts too. So for the most part, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, best player available. I will say I like to prioritize in these Devy leagues that are a little bit more shallow with how many players you can roster, guys that will come over to my NFL side sooner rather than later. So that means less freshmen, means more upperclassmen where we've kind of seen something before. We've seen at least some production and we see some opportunity ahead for them as well. Freshmen, hey, they're really fun and you can afford to roster a fair amount of them in campus to Cadden supplemental leagues or supplemental drafts, and those leagues where you have 45 guys on your roster total. But you can't really afford a ton of those guys when you have a Devy bench of, let's say, like 5 guys that you can only roster. They're going to be sitting clogging up a roster spot for 3, 4, 5 years, and some of them might never even like see the college field. So I like to prioritize guys who have done it a little bit before in those types of formats. I'm curious if you guys have any differing thoughts there on that specific strategy.
Me personally, I agree. Um, I think most of the Devy leagues I'm in, they don't have a limit on how many Devy players you can keep. You just get 4 picks every year, so that really thins out the pool. But I still agree with you because I would much rather have a Jeremiah Love right now than any freshman, and that's a guy who wasn't really drafted in any Devy leagues I was in up until this offseason because he kind of had his breakout last year, obviously. So the guy that typically went 101 was Bryce Underwood, the freshman going to Michigan, who was the number one rated quarterback. Um, for me, if I had the 101, I would be trying to trade out of that if I could, because like I said, I would much rather have drafted Jeremiah Love in that situation because of a lot of reasons that Aaron just stated. He's going to be on my NFL team. You're not getting points from these college players in a Devy league, so it doesn't do you any good to have Bryce Underwood on your team for 3, 4, maybe even 5 years if he even pans out and makes it to the NFL, which is not a guarantee. I know some people like to say 50+% hit rates on 5-star quarterbacks. That's not true. It's you're getting a lot better odds um, with a guy like Jeremiah Love, who's kind of already established himself as a day 2 draft pick next year, as long as everything remains the same. So I agree with Aaron right there. Um, I guess where I do like to take the freshman is when you're picking towards the end of that first round, um, maybe even in early second. But by then, a lot of the higher end guys are off the board. But then I can start to look at some of the freshmen that I like a Gideon Davidson or a Quincy Porter, who aren't necessarily like these 5-star guys that are getting really highly drafted, but guys that I think are talented. They're also in good position to maybe get early playing time, which is also important with these freshmen. And then beyond that, I guess I would just say I 100% agree with Aaron. Like I want to get players that I've seen do it already on the college side, and I can rely on them to be Devy assets moving forward. Even like a guy like Caden Lee, who we all kind of expect to have a big year at Ole Miss this year, and he might not be a highly rated Devy wide receiver right now, but for me, he's a guy that I like to draft. In the 4th round of these depleted Devy drafts, just because he's a guy I believe in more so than any of the freshmen that I could get at that spot.
Yeah, and I basically echo everything you guys said there, except for I do wonder. Like last year, we had a pretty, say a pretty stacked wide receiver freshman class, and especially at the top we had Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, who were essentially considered. Well, I guess Ryan Williams not as much like a guarantee, but he definitely proved himself. But Jeremiah Smith was essentially considered like one of the best prospects in however long. When you get to that point, you're okay. Are you okay with waiting 4 years possibly, or because you have that like this is the best prospect we've ever seen and yada yada, like whatever that you're hearing from the different services and different podcasts and what and all that. Because I'm looking at a draft from an actual draft from last year, and obviously Jeremiah Smith goes first overall. Ollie Gordon goes second overall, which ouch, that one hurts. I can't even blame the guy for taking Ollie there because what he did the year prior and everything, but that one just hurts. DJ Lagway goes at 103. That's probably okay with that. Shadur Sanders goes 104. You're probably not okay with that one. And then get to me. I had the 12th pick. I took Alec Iamaner there. And then I took Jackson Dart at 207 in the second round. But I mean, I can tell you there's so many players, Isaiah Bond, uh, Jordan James, Squirrel White, mixed in. But, I will say, normally I'm completely out on the freshman wide receivers. but you have Cam Coleman mixed in. You have where are the other ones? Ryan Wingo mixed in, and all these other freshman wide receivers, where it actually did work out this one particular time. So, are we changing anything in the way that we do things just because we had such a strong wide receiver class this past year?
And you can change things, I mean, just year to year, right? Adjust based on the player pool. And that's what we have to do this year. We know that there's some talent there in the incoming freshman quarterback guys, but, at the running back position, most agree that it's kind of a down year. The wide receiver position, I've seen more debate out there. I've seen some folks strongly say that the incoming freshman wide receiver recruits are not that great this year. I don't necessarily agree. I think that there's some solid ones. There's plenty of depth to the class, in my opinion. There's quite a few five-star wide receivers coming in this year, but yeah, maybe not quite as good as last year's, right? So we do have to adjust, bump down a little bit of the freshmen, and I think we're going to get to the supplemental pool here in a second, but it's a bit more bleak. It's a little bit more depleted this season, and that will bump up some guys who maybe in previous years shouldn't be going that high, but they just have to, just depending on the year. And if it's a down year, a strong class, or otherwise.
Yeah, and kind of going with my whole like Devy heavy approach and everything with C2C leagues, I basically do the same thing in Devy leagues. I'm looking for that third or fourth year guy most of the time. There was a reason why I took Aya Manor, in the first round. It was because I had high hopes for him. We'll see if it all works out or not. Obviously that didn't work out per se as far as like where I was hoping he was going to get drafted and all that kind of stuff. But he's in a good situation, so I still think it can work out. But then grabbing Jackson Dart, here we go. We're sitting pretty now. So that's the kind of guys that I'm focusing on most of the time. I don't want to wait 2 or 3 years. I don't want to have like in this particular league, it's the Sharks League. Andy took over an orphan for me this past season, so he kind of knows about it yet. He has not done his Devy draft this year yet, so we'll see how it all works out. But it's trying to figure, or like I'm not sitting here waiting for 5, 6, 7, 8 players to make it to my roster in 3 years. Like we have eight a max of 8 Devy players, and so I'm going to max those 8 players. I want to recycle those 8 players like basically every year. Well, we get 5 picks, so I mean essentially I want to recycle 5 players every single year, and then maybe I'll have like 3 there at the end. They're like a year or two older, but for the most part, I'm focusing on players that are ready to go that next season.
Yeah, I just want to go back to what Aaron was saying about how the supplemental pool this year, like in terms of Devi, isn't as deep in years past and is kind of forcing us to pick some of these freshmen just because we don't have very many like high end options outside of like, even a guy like Jace Brown who we really like isn't flying off the page at anybody like this guy's going to be, a solid NFL wide receiver. We think that he has the tools to probably get there, but he still has a lot of work to do. So that's where you're seeing a lot of these other freshmen get drafted before anyone else because there's just not a lot beyond, a lot of the guys that were successful last year moved on to the NFL or they were freshmen like those wide receivers that we just listed off. So there's not a ton of returning production at the P4 level anyway. There's a lot of guys that were really good at the G5 level who have moved up to P4, but those obviously are big Devy question marks. So this is a weird year, I think, where we're seeing a lot more freshmen get drafted higher than they typically would, just because it's probably a better dart throw to just go on the high 4-star, 5-star freshman than to go for a guy who is just now maybe going to have a breakout season if everything goes right.
Yeah, I love it. So we've done a lot of startup talk, a lot of supplemental talk here. We could obviously get into a little bit more of like C2C supplemental here in a minute, but I want to transition over to trade strategies because I feel like trading in C2C and even in just regular Devy leagues is just so difficult. And it's because everyone, you want to talk about in a regular Dynasty league, no Devy, no C2C, whatever. Think about the fact that there's 100 different trade calculators out there. There's there's 1,000 different ways that people are valuing those players. All right, well now talk about the fact that they're not even proven yet and they're in college, and it just it makes it makes it exponentially worse or exponentially harder to get anything done because it's just it's so difficult to be on the same page as your trade partner. And that's not me trying to scare people away from Devy, scare people away from C2C. I think all it is just, people having to get used to it. And eventually I hope we will get to that point. But the truth of the matter is we're just not there yet. And so it is difficult to get trades done. Although I will say, I've seen Aaron do it. I've seen Andy do it. I've definitely done some trading myself. While it is difficult, what are you looking for to get something done? Because of the difficult nature of trading in C2C and Devy leagues, do you go about things a little differently when you're focusing on a C2C or Devy league than you would in just say like a dynasty league or something like that? Are you willing to take more of a loss per se to get a deal done or anything like that, or do you have actual strategies that you're trying to put into play to get deals done?
I think that you should always go into trades, if you're going for a guy that you believe in, you should always go in with an open mind thinking like, hey, I might be paying more than market value to get this guy because I think he's worth more than market value. You should always have that mindset. If you're going into every trade thinking I need to win this trade from a value perspective, you're just going to cut yourself off from a lot of trade partners because there's a lot of people that do that. So if you're saying I need to win and he's saying I need to win, nothing's ever going to happen. So I think you always need to have that perspective. Like I might take a little bit of a value loss here, but I'm doing it because I believe in my heart that it's going to pay off in the long run. As far as trading college assets for NFL assets, the one rule to always live by is you should never trade a high end NFL asset and not get some sort of NFL compensation back in return. If you're just trading like a guy like Puka Nakua or something for all Devy picks and Devy players, that's going to be a losing trade 9 times out of 10. Just because of the hit rates on Devy, you might think this guy like an Alec Maynard, for example, or Devin Neal. You might think this guy is going to be a day 2 draft pick, and there's no doubt about it. And I don't need to worry about it. And then the draft rolls around, and everything's kind of crumbles and falls. Shedeur Sanders is probably the best example. You may think this is a lock for a first round draft pick, first round dynasty rookie pick because
Troy Franklin.
There's countless examples every single year, and there always is going to be a slip, or maybe they stay in college another year and things just didn't really go right. Ollie Gordon, who we mentioned earlier, is another great example. So if you're going to be
Keishawn Butte
NFL,
might be the best example out of all of them.
yeah, Keishawn Butte, Rocket Sanders, the list goes on and on. Like you can never find, you're always going to have these guys that were perceived first round valuations who end up being nothing, like literally nothing. So if you're going to be trading a high end NFL guy, make sure you're getting some NFL compensation back coming towards you, because otherwise your team's just going to be in crumbles before you know it, because this is a high risk game, honestly, when it comes to the college side. So you want to make sure that the integrity of your NFL team isn't too damaged when you are making those trades to improve your farm system, so to speak.
I think we can kind of turn this into even a dynasty talk for a second, because a lot of people are trading for 2027 picks right now because they're saying, let's just skip the 2026 class. Doesn't matter. 27 class is where it's at. We already talked about all those great freshman recruits from last year and everything. We've already talked about Jeremiah Smith. So if you're saying don't trade Puka Nakua for just anybody on the college side, there's people that are going out of their way to get those 2027 firsts right now because they're saying, I'm going to go get these studs. But by doing that, you're waiting 2 years for potential injuries and things to happen. Now, a draft pick can't get hurt, but the players that were going to go into those draft pick slots can get hurt or can fall off. Or, once again, look at Rocket Sanders, look at Ollie Gordon. I mean, look at a lot of these running backs that we've seen. Look at Keishon Butte, considered one of, if not the best wide receiver in his class for the longest time, and then just a complete afterthought when it comes to the NFL. And I'm not saying it's happening to Jeremiah Smith, but in that one particular example, Andy, are you trading Puka Nakua for Jeremiah Smith?
Straight up, no, I would never.
Yeah, I
I
think that's
would,
the point we need to get across. Is it's like
yeah,
you always have to hold the NFL side to a higher standard. You just have to. Even if it's a C to C league, it's a 50-50 split, and you're paid the same amount of money on both sides, all that kind of stuff. This is why I go the Devy heavy approach, because it might be 51-49, but you have to always give a little bit of more. You have to care just a little bit more about that NFL side than you do the college side.
yeah, and even think of it in terms of, I mean, that I get where you're going with that example, but maybe it's a lesser player even. I'm trying to think of like maybe like an AJ Brown who's even not even as highly valued as like a Puka Nakua, and if you're moving him for Jeremiah Smith, even then I would probably still have some question marks because I know what AJ Brown's going to be for the next 4 5 years. And in Devy, like I'm gonna have to wait till 2027 to get Jeremiah Smith, and when he gets there, he might have like a Marvin Harrison Jr. type season, which isn't a bad thing, but it's also not a thing that's gonna win me any championships. So t- take the take the guys that are scoring you points right now and will continue to score you points for the next half decade, rather than putting it on a hope and a prayer. And Jeremiah Smith is obviously shaping up to be a generational wide receiver prospect, but he's still not a guy that you need to stake all your hopes on at this point in time.
Yeah, where it gets interesting is the aging guys like the Tyreek Hills of the world, and then you go down the list of like the Mike Evans, and these you can start moving off of those guys and getting some college talent. I'm not saying that you need to be moving guys straight up. Like, I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation, Tyreek Hill, or would you rather have like one of those guys at Clemson, Brant Wesco or TJ Moore? Like those are different dilemmas, but in general, it's not a really a safe strategy to acquire these college players. John said it earlier, picks are a little bit more safe, like in a dynasty league versus a Devy league. These players are still risky. Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, they have all the talent in the world. They still might not break out at Clemson. There's a lot of mouths to feed there. There's tons of things that can happen to college kids. So I do think that it's a good conversation. At some point, if it's not a stud on the NFL side, maybe I do start to see how I can kind of pivot off of that player, pick up some underrated guys on the college side, for example. And I will say, from like a trade standpoint, to just going back to your initial question, John, I really like trading for a variety of reasons in leagues, but it's a way for me to at least pick up some value as I'm moving around. I think I alluded to that earlier as well, but it's just a valuable tool. And you know what? You have to approach it from a viewpoint of you're not going to get a trade done with everybody. In fact, you're going to feel out rather quickly within your league who is uncomfortable making trades on the college side or just in general, who is, maybe that greedy person who's also not compromising and or maybe not respectful in conversations, and maybe you're just never going to get a deal done with them. Just move on and move to folks who at least want to have some conversations. Eventually something will work out if you're patient and or collaborating. So I think that it's worthwhile to establish some relationships with your league mates. This is something that when I first started getting into fantasy football, and I've always been a guy who likes to trade and make a lot of moves and be just a very active league mate on waivers and otherwise. I used to get a little bit offended by some of the trade offers, and then I'd kind of push back or or I'd really try to sell a guy, right? I'd say, well, this is why this guy really makes sense for you. I think he's going to break out. And they'd ask me, well, why are you trying to trade him then if you really think all these things? So I think I've tried to kind of tone down on that, because ultimately you want to be respectful to that trade partner, but also pitch some ideas that maybe are mutually beneficial at the end of the day. That's what we need to do to get deals done. So I think trading is a valuable tool, though, to get things that you want from your build, maybe specific players that you just weren't quite able to land, or maybe you really want to land in a draft. Sometimes you just got to get creative with trade conversations.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the easiest thing that I've figured out, the easiest way to get trades done in Devy and or C2C is everyone has a completely different value of each individual player, and it's going to be very difficult. But for the most part, everyone kind of has an idea of what a draft pick is worth. And so, it's just so much easier to get picks in trades rather than trying to go after a particular player. And if it's just a Devy, straight up Devy league, you just go, okay, give me your Devy first, give me your Devy second, so on and so forth. And it's just so much easier to get a trade done that way than trying to go, okay, give me Ryan Wingo. Okay, well, I mean, you might think Ryan Wingo's worth a third. They might think Ryan Wingo's worth two first. And it's just so you're so far off that like even starting that conversation is so difficult. But you say, give me a second, and you probably pretty close on what you guys think a second is worth. And so, it's so much easier just to make that move. And in C2C, honestly, I feel like that's where I've made some of the best moves that I've made. And I'm not saying it always works, so don't. This isn't me just like completely tuning my horn or anything like that. But some of the best moves I've made in C2C were players that could have possibly been a thing. And then they kind of got their shot, whether it was in a small sample or whatever it was. And I was just like, I'm out. I'm done. I saw enough to say I'm just out. And yet they still had their fans. They still had people willing to give something for them. And so players that were maybe drafted for a first, trade them away for a second, and now you get that second back. You're able to go, make another move in the following year, and you get rid of some of that dead weight. And now you might end up, it's a risky scenario. You might get rid of a guy that ends up becoming Jackson Dart, or somebody like that. That ends up being a valuable piece. You can do that, but I can say I did it with Devin Brown, and I'm not hating that trade right now. Getting a second for Devin Brown after I took over an orphan where he was probably drafted in the first of the supplemental. I traded him away for a second round pick. Here we go. I'm sitting pretty, and I've done it with a lot of other ones. And so I've said in the past, I'll say it again. I'm willing to be a little more risky when it comes to that kind of stuff, and just say once I've seen a little bit of a player, I'm going to go ahead and make my mind up on that player, and I can tell you it has worked out a lot more times than it has failed me. And so it's just something that I kind of stick to, and so I'm willing to go ahead and make that move when other people are still kind of holding out hope, like, oh, I might be, I don't know, he could still be a guy. I'm like, nope, he's done. Sell him, get off my team. And that's where you're able to get extra picks. Now, like Aaron's talking about, now you have the ability to move around a draft and do a lot of things like that. So you have that flexibility, but you do that by gaining those extra picks, and by having that extra ammo.
And I think that there's also an edge to be had when you're getting to the time of year where you maybe have to cut down on your roster sizes, or, whether it's a Devy limit for, how many guys you can have on that taxi squad, and say, just inquire to people, put it in the group chat, but maybe just take a little extra time to DM some folks. Just like, I notice you have 5 guys already, and like, you're going to have to cut down. Like, would you trade any of them for just a little pick swap or something like that? And then maybe you could land a guy who breaks out, like a Jace Brown, like wide receiver, Kansas State, or Jonah Coleman, running back, Washington. You go down the list, and there's lots of interesting guys that maybe people are like, I kind of got to cut them. Or maybe there's deeper guys in C2C leagues where you're like, you know what, that Mario Craver guy, he could break out this year at Texas A&M. Reed Harris, Boston College. You go down the list and get those guys on the cheap. Again, maybe you're going to have to give up a little sweetener, something or other. It's not like they're always going to be free, but sometimes one person's trash is going to be another person's treasure as like a late round steal, or like just as a simple swap. So it always pays to ask before like cut downs and all of that kind of thing too. Just an easy way in trade negotiations to maybe scoop up a little value, be mutually beneficial as well.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Because there's once again because there's such difference in valuations and everything. You have to find the players that the person's out on, or you have to find the player that the person loves. And so where in a dynasty league, it might just be sending blind offers as your way of doing things. In Devy and C2C leagues, you almost have to learn who your league mates are, and it takes a little extra time, takes a little more time, a little more effort, but when it's all said and done, you know who your players are. I'm in active trade talks in a C2C league right now with one of our good friends, Heidenreich, and he is a great trade partner. But he will never just do a one for one trade. Like it's never going to happen. And so it's just figuring out which 27 players we're going to trade, and that's what we're going to do. So, that's what we're actively working on right now. And we will get there. I know we'll get there, but it takes time. And, he just sent me a trade. And I'm like, nope, I hate it. And, I sent him a trade and he's, nope, I hate it. But we know each other well. We get at least one major trade done every single year. And it's because we just sit there and go back and forth talking about it. And eventually you get there. But that's why in Devy and C2C, I think it just takes a little more effort, but you can get it done, even though it's a little harder to value those players.
Yes, and we don't want to scare anybody away. Like, I mean, these leagues you can still be active in, especially once you get kind of comfortable with the format. I think in the most recent supplemental draft I was in, I made something like 13, 14, 15 trades just in the supplemental draft itself. So that's not typical. I would say it's definitely more trading than average. But if you give guys some options too, you make a list, just take a little extra time and say, like, I have these like 10 guys that I kind of like from your team. Are you kind of lower on any of these guys? Or like, do you think any of these guys are tradable assets? I think that's an easy, actionable way to start some conversations. And maybe they say, hey, I love all those guys. But usually they're like, you know what? I don't really love this. I don't know, LJ Martin guy or whatever the case is. Maybe you can get something done.
I was gonna say that exact same sentence. Like, help yourself, help whoever you're trading with know what you want. Because if you give them that list of 10, 15 guys, like, hey, these are guys that I'd be interested in if you want to get something done, and maybe it starts with them saying like, hey, I wanted to get such and such off your team. Say, okay, I can trade him, and these are the guys that maybe I would like from your team, and then they'll build an offer from there. And a lot of times when you do that, they'll give you something that was better than what you would have expected because of what Aaron was saying. They're maybe lower on those guys than you are, and when that happens, it's obviously good for everybody. So help yourself and help your league mate, figure out what you want too.
All right. Well, I didn't know exactly where this pod was going to go. We just, said, hey, we're just going to talk strategy, and we did. We might even have to do another pod in the near future where we talk about it even more because I don't even know if we discussed everything that we need to. So obviously, strategy is a very important part of all these drafts and everything. Especially, what we could probably do an entire pod just on supplemental draft strategy, which we didn't really touch on too much tonight, and we probably will do that in the near future. We figure this stuff out as we go, so we'll talk about it in a couple weeks, and we'll probably do that as we have some supplementals of our own going on. Very soon. I know I have a couple going on in July. So I'll be interested to talk about that kind of stuff here pretty soon. Andy, I'm not going to ask you for words of wisdom. You gave us your Italian words of wisdom from last week. Aaron, you blessed us with the gift of the of the guest the guy this week. So I'm not going to do any words of wisdom or anything like that this week. We're just going to say we really do appreciate you guys listening. A lot of great stuff in the works for Devy Devotional. We're working on a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Announcements and all kinds of stuff to come, possibly in the next couple days. A lot's up in the air. It's it's difficult, but the important thing is make sure you're liking and subscribing us wherever you're finding us, whether it's Spotify, Apple, leaving 5-star reviews, of course, and at Gridiron Ratings on YouTube. Check us out on the live stream. Jump in there and chat with us because we love it when anyone except for Felix talks to us. It's a really great time. So we appreciate you all except for Felix. We will be back in your ears as soon as possible. But for now, we are cashing out.